Before we get into tonight's presentations, I do want to offer the opportunity to myself to do a brief presentation on something that I've taken more interest in and something that I actually learned during the last 3 years, which is the moon actually has, the full moons all have their own names. Did anybody else already know that? Am I really behind the curve on this? I see a few hands, but I'm not seeing all of you, which means this is going to be very exciting for at least some of us. But absolutely, the full moons, when they show up in the night sky, each month actually has their own identifiers within that. I was really interested to learn that. I also know that this moon picture right here, not the sunflowers from the sky, but the moon itself, I actually took that picture myself. You can see Elliot with one T right up here near that crater. Yeah, so we'll be talking about just briefly including you in the conversation about the different moons that we experience. Since we are at the beginning, close to the beginning of the year, I'm going to go and start in January. January 6th is known as the wolf moon. Oh, very good, very good. Native Americans and medieval Europeans named January's full moon after the howling of hungry wolves. It's a little Duran Duran reference there, lamenting the midwinter scarcity of food. It was also known as the old moon and the ice moon, probably for good reason on the ice moon, given that it's in January. Make sure. The next moon is February, which is the snow moon. This is it's the typically cold, snowy weather of February in North America. Gave this particular moon its title. But we also know then in a galaxy far, far away, that might say, that's snow moon. That's right. I agree. I don't know who wrote this, but we're going to have to talk to them afterwards. And of course, we are actually in March right now, and if you were looking up to the sky 2 nights ago, not necessarily last night, last night was the actual full moon for March. However, it was typical March weather, so it was a little bit cloudy. So if you saw it the night before, which is actually when I took that picture that was up there a minute ago, you would have seen the worm moon. As it turns out, a lot of, whenever you see the full moon, you can actually see it just gosh darn near full, both the day before and the day after. So if you ever wonder, is that the full moon? And it looks full, it probably is, but there's going to be a day right there in the middle that is the most full. If you're curious, the worm moon is actually named that because that's when the worms start to pop up and crawl around, and you can start to see all of those worm trails, those worm that appear in the newly thawed ground. It's also known as the chaste moon. I'm not going to ask too many questions about that. The death moon, as well as the crust moon, which is named after my favorite type of snow, which is that crusty snow, and it ultimately snows and then gets a little bit thawed and then it freezes again, and it's that really crusty snow. So that's why they call it crust moon as well. Then we've got April, which brings us the pink moon. And this is actually named after a species of early blooming wildflower up in North America, in the northern United States. And so the pink moon is named after those flowers, also known as the sprouting grass moon, the egg moon, and the fish moon. Then we've got May, which brings us our flower moon. Not technically those flowers in particular, but obviously I'm going to be a fan of the sunflower here in Kansas. But the flower moon is named after the abundant blooms that do often come up in May, as we know. May is a really good time for flowers. Also known as the hare moon, not the hare moon, but the rabbit moon, corn planting moon, and the milk moon. Those tend to be a little bit more descriptive. Then we move into June, where we've got the strawberry moon. If you've ever looked up in the sky and seen a big old strawberry, please talk to your physician. But if it is in June, just know that that is the name of the full moon, named after the harvesting of strawberries around that time. Also known as the rose moon and the hot moon, as it starts to become the beginning of the hot season, the summer heat. Then we move into July. And July is known as the buck moon. A little unfortunate because Uncle Buck actually came out in August instead of July of 1989, but it was close enough that I decided to use that picture that I found on the internet. But the reason it's called the buck moon is because a lot of the deer have lost their antlers up to that point, and that's when the antlers actually start growing back. So it's aptly named the buck moon. Then we move into August, where we have the sturgeon moon. That would be a terrifying romantic sight to look up to. And it's aptly named because that is North American fishing tribes called August full moon, the sturgeon moon, since the species was abundant during this month. It's also called the green corn moon, the gray moon, and the red moon, because it's red as haze. If you ever look up and you see that. Then in August this year, we actually have a really exciting bonus moon, the blue moon. And when we talk about the blue moon, this is actually an extra moon that we get once every 2.5 years, give or take, because as we know, the cycles of the moon don't necessarily match the way that human beings have almost arbitrarily decided on the days of the calendar, and so we end up with some extra days, and so about every 2.5 years you'll see a blue moon at different times of the year. Then we move into September, where we get to see the harvest moon, probably made most famous by Neil Young and his album Harvest Moon, but it is called the harvest moon, probably for obvious reasons, which is when things get harvested. Then we move into October, where we've got the hunter's moon. And I'll be honest, I couldn't bring myself to put up a picture of maybe a more common hunter right now. So I went ahead and went with Craven the Hunter from the Spider-Man series. But the hunter's moon is aptly named because that is actually when tribes would go out and hunt. Because that is when the deer had been fattened, they'd been eating all summer, and they were getting most appealing to folks. And it tends to be a brighter moon, so it actually makes it easier to hunt later and into the evening as well. Then we move into November with the beaver moon. Oh, right, absolutely. That was my favorite picture I saw there on the internet. And it's actually called, it's kind of unclear as to why it's called the beaver moon, so you guys are willing, are ready, you're welcome to submit that online as to what you think the beaver moon references. Yeah. But it's also referred to as the frost moon, which I guess could be a counter to that part right there. And then, and lastly, we've got December 26th, we're going to have our cold moon, and it is named because it's so gosh darn cold in December here in the Midwest.